Hey, just making sure the links are all correct here. Good. It looks like they are. Hey, Dan. Hey, Dave.
Hey, guys.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Forgot I had to click got it for the recording acceptance before I could turn on video and audio. I was like, what's going on here?
Yeah, welcome.
Thing.
Yeah, hey, Dave. Welcome back from vacation.
Yeah, thanks. Like I said, it's good to be back, but came back to about a million emails and Slack messages.
I'm sure. Cool. Dan, you still good to be the scribe?
Yeah, looking up the meeting notes link now.
Perfect. Thanks.
Got it.
Hey, Pete. Morning. Hey, Ben.
Hi. How did you get that overtime shirt?
Sorry, I missed that one. What's up?
Oh, I was asking how you got your t-shirt.
Yeah. So actually at KubeCon, one of the guys at Dynatrace was the one that printed the t-shirt. So I just went up to him and yeah, he hooked me up.
Nice.
All right, we could probably get started any minute now. So yeah, it doesn't look like there's any newcomers, but yeah. Oh, spoke too soon. Let it load. Hey, RJ. We'll see. RJ, would you be interested in introducing yourself real quick?
Hey, I'm just listening in. I'm from ServiceNow, leading kind of developing new businesses here at the company.
Ah, perfect. Well, welcome. And it looks like we have one other then. Conrad, welcome. Hey, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hey there, folks. I'm on the West Coast. It's a bit early for me. Yeah, was working at Sisu recently, and I'm just kind of interested in feature flagging and hoping to kind of follow along the project. But just joined 2 weeks ago and trying to keep track of this. So
perfect. Well, nice to meet you. Welcome. All right. Yeah, Pete's also a West Coaster. So cool. All right, we can go ahead and kick it off. First thing I want to start with is I'd like to release the spec v020. I have an issue open right now for kind of what that release process would look like. The last kind of remaining task would be there's a pull request open right now for removing the context transformer from the spec. I don't think that would be super impactful for most SDKs besides maybe the Node one. And basically the replacement would be a provider hook, which would then tap into the existing like hook functionality. Obviously that provides a lot more flexibility and then also doesn't introduce a new concept that SDK developers will have to deal with. So I'm going to wait until that one is officially accepted and then cut the release. If you have any interest, check out that release process issue that I've created. There's a few touch points that we'll have to make sure to update. Eventually it'd be nice to automate that process where possible, but it's a kind of a relatively complex set of touch points. I'm going to try to manually go through it a few times. I'll document anything that I find, and then if anyone has any interest in helping automate that, it would be a nice thing to knock out in the future. Hopefully we're not doing a ton of spec releases, but the reality is that at this stage we probably will have to make a handful of changes over the next few months. Justin's not here, so this one probably isn't that interesting to most, but the group IO email address, I think we're going to keep that for a little while. That one actually allows us to sign up for accounts and things like that we can't actually use the CNCF one for that one. So that was an action item from the last meeting, but I think it does make sense to keep it at least temporarily. Next one for me is the CNCF. I found out yesterday that they offer an enterprise license for Sneak. the security scanning tool and license scanning tool. Right now, we're just using the free version, but I'm going to try to sync up with someone from the CNCF to see if we can actually get our org added to the enterprise version. If that's not possible, we may have to update our configurations to use that. And we should also, and I'll try to create issues in all the affected repos, but we'll have to also do a license scanner. Like that's part of the CNCF requirements to make sure that we're not using, licenses we shouldn't be for any dependencies. Again, I don't think that one will be real impactful considering that most of our SDKs are low to basically no dependencies. But it is something to just be aware of, and also be careful if you're an SDK maintainer to not introduce any dependencies that have licenses that could become an issue down the road. Any questions about any of those topics so far?
Yeah, I had one question about the removing of the context transformers. I was messing around with it today, and if you try to get resolve the Boolean with Boolean value in Node, and you pass like your flag key and your default, and then you have the third parameter, the transformed context. When I pass anything there, it doesn't become available for me in the hook. I was expecting that everything will be accessible, or in even the default context transformer. So I don't know if I'm doing something wrong in my provider, or
So are you talking about doing this right now in like the Node SDK or something, for example?
yes, yeah.
Okay, so that hasn't been updated yet. This is still at the proposal phase for the spec. So once that's
yeah, I understand, but
okay.
is it not the idea that if you have a default context transformer, you implement it, that you should also get the data from the third parameter passed in that function at the moment, or only the ones you pass when you...
So at a high level, the idea is to remove the context transformer and replace it with hooks. You would allow provider developers to basically build hooks into the provider, and that would be kind of abstracted away from anyone that's going to be using that provider itself. And that would allow you to, do whatever you need using the regular like hook functionality.
Yeah, I understand. But so at the moment, if I do a resolve Boolean value, pass the third parameter for context to pass like extra contextual data, at the moment for me it doesn't end up in the at the currently context transformer. So I cannot like it only for me. It only seems to get the targeting key and the context that I passed when I created my client, not like stuff I passed on a one-off basis when I want to evaluate a future flag. So I'm not wondering if, well, we can discuss it on Slack.
Could you create either ping me on Slack or create an issue in the SDK, and we'll take a look at it there. But likely that behavior will be kind of addressed when we switch to the provider hooks.
No worries.
Perfect. Let's see. Next one is we've been working on the documentation quite a bit recently, so I'll give a quick update on what that looks like. Keep in mind, I'm not a designer, and if anyone is, I would certainly appreciate some kind of help here. But I do think it's a decent first step here. You can see that this is, hopefully you can see my screen. Is it, need a thumbs up from someone that you can see it?
Yeah, it's coming up. Yeah.
Perfect, thanks. So just a landing page. We have a dark mode and light mode. The search right now is just like a local search. I didn't feel like making it overly complex, but we can always do like Algolia or something once we have a little bit more content. There's not a ton here, but you can kind of see that like we are using Docusaurus. It's the new like V2, and this is kind of cool that you get kind of for free in Docusaurus, where all of your language preferences are saved in local storage. And then so if I refresh and stuff, like the language preferences remain, which is kind of cool. And then I started working on docs here, so there's some improvements certainly that need to be made, but you can see that we start having some of the core concepts defined here with the language and some examples. And then I also brought in the specification, so you can see here This is using a Git submodule, so we'll have to make sure that when we do major specification releases that we update the submodule. But the rest is just kind of automatic and just pulled right in from the official spec. And part of the idea there is, especially the glossary terms, we can start referencing throughout the documentation to make sure that everyone understands the terminology that we're using. Still pretty early here, but I think this is go ahead, Alex.
How do we contribute to this? Like, if I want to add something about the OpenFeature operator and flag D and those kind of things, like a kind of tutorial or a walkthrough, is this a good place for that? Like in the tutorial section, and how do I get started?
Yep, it'd be a perfect spot for that. And it's just we have a docs.openfeature.dev. I just created an issue, and then when you open a pull request, we're using Netlify, and so like the pull request itself will actually have like a preview link and everything. So it's actually a pretty slick
I don't need
process.
to run anything locally like Jekyll or anything like that.
You can run DocuSource locally to test it. Okay. But I also, actually, that's a good point. One thing to mention, hopefully this isn't an issue. I was trying to cut down on like kind of the cognitive load when you add new stuff to the docs, but I added a real quick plugin here. Actually, there's two of them, and this will automatically do the submodule, assuming you have Git set up on your computer. It will do the submodule like recursive call when you first run it. And it also will make sure to copy over the content from external content. So this is just a generic plugin that moves files. So if we added like additional submodules, we can configure it to move documentation to whatever parts of the doc we need. That's just a quick aside. Basically what you'll need to do once you want to add in your content is you pull it. It is using Yarn because it's we could switch to NPM, but Yarn just comes kind of pre-bundled since DocuSource is a Facebook project. But you just clone this repo, you just do a Yarn to get all the dependencies, and then it's just a like npm run start would run the docs locally. And then if you add content under docs, under the different sections, it will just start showing up. The one caveat to that is you may need to update the DocuSource config, where they basically have some of the, excuse me, it's not here. It's so here's a footer section, for example, but we also have items. So this is like some of like the top bar navs and stuff like that. So the items will show up, but you may need to have like navigational options potentially configured. And happy to go into more information on that if you have any questions. But it's a pretty simple process. It actually works pretty easy. The only thing to keep in mind, and this is another, I guess, good transition to the changes that I made to the spec, is you can start adding in these like header information to, the title would go to like the title of the page and the head, description, same deal. And then you can start controlling like the sidebar positions and stuff like that. So you may have to experiment with some metadata, but it's pretty straightforward. And if you have any questions, feel free to ping me. But, yep. So this is a good spot to start adding docs.
Question on this one though too, of kind of that blurring the line again too. Is this around the spec, or because if we add in flag D, that's a specific implementation? Are we looking to end up adding vendors at some point to this too, or?
Yeah, I think we could put it under tutorials. So we could be like how to use flat or OpenFeature with LaunchDarkly, for example, or Harness or Split or whatever. We could put it in here. The other thing, I think I still have it as one of my action. I'll just move that up above. But I've also been working on how we can build like a integrations or like an artifact matrix, so people can start registering different providers and hooks in a more discoverable way. There's a couple options. There's a tool called Artifact Hub that may or may not work for us. They seem to be more around like Kubernetes assets, so it's not a perfect fit. But then OTel basically just has like a table that they just dump out a bunch of stuff. So like I'm trying to find some reasonable option, probably somewhere in between those two. If anyone has any ideas of a good way to kind of make some of these providers and hooks more easily discoverable, that's kind of the challenge I think we need to solve next. And then, yeah, basically back to your point, Dan, I think making it like a clear section here where it would, I think it is okay for it to be like these end-to-end examples for saying like, using OpenFeature with flag D or any of the vendors. A tutorial I think would be a perfect spot for that.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, I had one thing. I have a license to Tailwind UI, and they had released this template for documentation page. So maybe we can have a look at that, and maybe we could use that as a base design-wise. I don't know if anyone saw that one, but I will link it in the chat. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I'm certainly open for ideas here. This is just trying to get content out so we can, go from there. There's also certainly opportunities for like blog posts. If anyone has any, blogs that they'd like to add, I would start with an issue first, but go ahead and create that. And then, feel free to start contributing. And yeah, if there's any other like items or doc structure we'd like to see, additional content, anything like that, go ahead and create an issue and feel free to contribute. Because this is something that I think will obviously become really, really important for people to start understanding how to use OpenFeature at all and what's available to them. So
yeah,
cool. It is still kind of in like a soft launch mode, I would say. Like there is no link from the main website here. So if you do have time to kind of go through it, make sure the content is easily digestible. There are some, like the introduction pieces is something that I'm going to refactor heavily probably over the next few days to give a better, overview of what OpenFeature is. And I think Pete was also working on potentially like what a feature flag is. I'm not sure if you have, if you've had a chance to look at it, but that would be a nice spot to maybe put as a separate page in the introduction as well.
Yeah, I worked on it and then I lost momentum, but I can pick it back up again. I actually got most of it done. Maybe I know I was going to ask a bunch of questions about that, but maybe I'm getting too much in the weeds. Never mind. Don't worry.
Okay. Well, ping me if you have any questions on that, and I'll because I do want to refactor some stuff, so I want to make sure that we don't have duplicate work going on there. So.
I started like just essentially tearing apart the page that was already there, and I think I'm still gonna submit it just as if I submit it as a PR, I'll probably just tear apart that page. But it's not, the intention is not like I think we should replace this page. It's just like it's just going to be like a place to put the content. But I think maybe we'll end up as maybe it could be a separate page. But that's just kind of where I started.
Sure. Yep. Okay, that sounds good. Perfect. And then I guess the other questions would be right now, like under the docs, we have just like the concepts pieces, but it would be nice to have SDK specific documentation. And I'm not sure what the preference would be for that. Like, would it be better to have docs in, Docusaurus format basically in each SDK and then kind of pull them in and merge them in the docs using like the submodules like I did for the spec? Or would it be better to have a section inside, the docs repo itself, and we just have to make sure to keep them in sync in some reasonable fashion?
I mean, I think my take on this is like definitely for some kind of like language ecosystems, people expect the docs to be essentially just embedded like in like README. Like if it's an NPM module, you kind of expect it all to just be like right there in the README, and like keeping it in sync, keeping the docs in sync between like a README and then maybe somewhere else in the repo, and then also in like a separate repo for the documentation might be painful. So like, would it be too crazy to kind of say that like to pull in like I'm just thinking out loud, but like pull in the README for each repo and kind of like put it on the website? I guess that would just be a ton of submodules or something. It would be pretty.
I mean, it would be relatively easy. It's just there's a bunch of stuff like badges and licensing information and stuff on the main README that we don't want to strip out, I suppose. I guess that's the big question, and it's something we don't necessarily have to answer now. But I'd like to kind of figure out the ideal way of managing like SDK specific documentation without adding like a huge amount of cognitive overhead or something.
I mean, if you were a end user and you were getting to the point that you wanted to read like the specific documentation for like the node provider for whatever, I kind of feel like it doesn't need to all be in one centralized place. Like if it just links to the repo or whatever, then that would serve the purpose. I don't think there's that much benefit in having all of the detailed implementation readmes for every SDK in the same place. I'm thinking about like for
we could certainly start
OpenFeature.
with that at least. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think maybe just having like an SDKs page that just kind of like looks a little bit nice, but then links out to the, you know, the GitHub page. That's probably sufficient for now. I mean, that would be an easy thing to just knock out, and then we can always pull more in.
I reckon.
Okay.
I reckon in the early days that's probably better as well, because you're going to have a bit more churn in the repos. So just keeping those docs up to date is probably
exactly. That's why, like, to have a bunch of documentation on through a bunch of repos has the potential of becoming stale quickly. So yeah, I like that. I think that's a nice, easy approach that will scale well until we need to rethink it a bit. So, circling quickly back to just like discoverability of like providers and hooks. What do we think about maybe just doing a thing similar to what we just talked about for SDKs for now, at least? Have just kind of like I don't know, an array basically of providers and hooks in there, and some maybe basic searching functionality.
Yeah.
Or is there a better tool that you guys can think of that would maybe make the discoverability easier?
I think starting simple with just like a table or something, and people can search
Like
through it.
raise a pull request or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so just like if I have like a one spot to put it, some docs on like how to add it there, and it's just basically a table in alphabetical order or something for now. I think we can start there and make it more slick in the future.
I would vote for, I would lean towards making it super easy for someone to add their provider and not have to like read a bunch of things of like, oh, well, there's this generalized abstraction for a provider and you fill in this JSON, like making it so that someone can just literally just like go in there and edit some markdown or something close to that would be.
Yeah,
like,
I think that would be best.
Okay.
I also
think
think like just from like the presenting the information, the number one, like I feel like the number one use case is for an application integrator, like someone who just wants to get started with OpenFeature for their, for their vendor or open source thing and their language. And so just having like the basic thing of like the providers first, and then there's that like the hooks and all the like fancy like additional stuff kind of like further down.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to, especially if we don't have any kind of filtering functionality, to keep them clearly separated for now. That makes the most sense. Okay. I'll see what I can find. There's some simple things that I can use in Docusaurus, I think, to make it pretty straightforward for now. So I'll see what I can come up with, just so we have a kind of a place to register these. And related to that, in the provider documentation, I added some recommendations for if you're going to name or create like a repo or artifact, for publishing to any of the artifact repositories. So if you are going to work on a provider, there's a couple of maybe recommendations there to take a look at. And if you have feedback on that, certainly let me know. But just try to add a little bit of consistency. So even if, if you are looking through a table, for example, you can follow a pretty clear pattern of what these things would be called. Cool.
Hey, Mike, I've got it while we're still talking about the website. I've got one kind of question. So I was working on a page, and I wanted to do like a graphic for it or an illustration, and I started just doing it in oh gosh, I can't remember the name of the tool, but some drawing tool, and I wanted to just upload the drawing, but then I realized like, if I do that, then basically the only person that can like edit that drawing is me. And I'm not sure what the best way to handle that is. Like, should we, if we've got like an illustration, should we like upload like the source for the illustration to some other like directory and like somewhere, so that if someone comes, if I win the lottery and go and live in Tahiti and someone wants to update the image, it'd be good for them to not have to do it from scratch. But I can't. I'm not
Yeah.
really sure what the best way to do
What
that.
sort of illustration are you talking about? Like a diagrammatic or like an iconography kind of thing?
Like a diagrammatic, but not like a like. So I started looking at like using Mermaid or something like that, but it's not like it's kind of like a boxes and arrows kind of diagram, but I want to actually be able to kind of like
I've used Excalidraw for years.
Yeah,
And
Excalidraw was the one I was using as well,
and you
actually.
can embed, and of course, you embed the metadata into the PNG, right? So other people can then edit it.
Oh,
When you go to
On-
Excalidraw and you click the export button, there is a embed scene option. If you click on that and you download your PNG, anybody can then take that PNG back into Excalidraw and modify it.
that's amazing.
Yeah, they use the space in the beginning of the PNG header metadata.
All this money being spent on crypto, and they should just give Excalidraw just like a ton of money for their genius.
Yeah, so maybe we can document that, because I actually that's an interesting question, and I'm glad you brought that up, Alex, because Todd has actually been embedding both the configuration for Excalidraw and the image, but it sounds like we could basically just do both as long as people are aware that that's possible. That's the challenge, I suppose. But
It's in the binary part of the file. It's really clever.
That's so cool. Yeah, I guess
Cool.
we just have to yeah, like I think it's a good point, Mike. Like it's not for dummies like me that don't know about it, they're just going to see it as a PNG. So we'll have to.
So one idea potentially could be in Docusaurus, at least there's like a static content folder, so we can maybe just throw like a README or something that either references that folder or in that folder potentially. Like it's not really a big deal if someone sees that publicly or something. So just to make it obvious that like any of the, or some of these drawings at least could be edited in Excalidraw. Cool. That was a good tip. Thanks, Alex. And I guess also related to Alex, so we have 2 KubeCon sessions that were accepted, at least that I'm aware of. There may be more, but Alex had one that sounds really interesting. I'm not sure. Alex, do you want to give a quick, 30-second overview?
Yeah, I was just going to try and do a general project overview, kind of, why does OpenFeature exist? Who are some of the people who are involved in building it? And then look at sort of a specific implementation that I was involved with. So that's the flag D and the OpenFeature operator. And my ambition is to have a demo set up so I can use probably Launch Darkly or something similar, Flagsmith. It doesn't any vendor, and turn something on in Kubernetes from the UI. And I think that'd be kind of interesting. So yeah, it should be a good first introduction. I know a lot of people are excited about it already. So in complement to Mike's as well, I guess.
Yeah, and so ours was basically, the idea was around quality gating in production. It's not really a super novel concept, but the idea is like, you may have tested, your code in lower environments very heavily, but then you roll out to production and it breaks because of a configuration between environments. And so the idea here is like you're introducing, a new service that requires, an auth token, for example. The auth token doesn't work in production, but it's behind a feature flag. That feature flag, or that new feature, is tested, automatically with some kind of end-to-end test, but only enabled for that end-to-end test. When it fails the quality gate, basically we can go through some kind of remediation flow, change that password, and then it will go through, pass the quality gate, and then the feature will be rolled out to end users. So the idea is basically testing in production in an automated fashion. I think it's a pretty interesting concept because I've certainly run into that before. And it's pretty easy to make, configuration issue, or introduce issues through configuration, which is basically impossible to test without something, like a feature flag system. Cool. Next item real quick. If you've been working on an SDK, we did start playing around with some GitHub issue templates. If you'd like to see examples, we have them in FlagD, Node, and the Go SDK. They're pretty basic, so if you want to make modifications to it, certainly feel free to. But they're available and easy to just kind of port over to whatever SDK you're currently working on. And then there's one last one that may be kind of interesting to the group. Todd, before he went on vacation, opened up an OpenFeature enhancement proposal for flag change events. And so if you want to take a look at what the proposal is there, it's, I think, pretty comprehensive. There's a few open questions on if this is it's certainly or pros and cons to the approach, and kind of leave it a little open to feedback. But at a high level, it's basically like you would be able to subscribe to flag change events, and that would call a method with some context there, and then you would have to hit the API basically to get the latest state. And part of the reason for that was around context, and to make it generic enough for all feature flag vendors. So yeah, take a look at that proposal if you have any interest in that. It's not something that we're pushing real heavily, but it is something that change events seem to be fairly common across most SDKs, and it would be nice to be able to support that. And I do think it adds some pretty interesting flexibility for how you could use feature flagging, especially for things like what Alex was talking about with infrastructure and whatnot. If you're able to subscribe to change events without actually having to have like a request initiate the flag lookup. That's it for me. Any questions on that topic? Cool. Alex, it looks like you're next.
This is just a quick one, and one for you, Mike. As a CNCF project, are we entitled to a booth at KubeCon?
I'm not sure. I will check on that. If it is, it's going to be minimal, I'm sure.
Right.
Yeah, the sandbox.
It just these like white boxes, but we could just, I think you get a television screen and that's it. But would be great, right? It's a start.
Yep, I'm pretty sure we do. I think it may be like you share it with another group and we have to just do it for a couple hours, which may be better, honestly, so we don't have to do booth duty the whole time. So yeah, I'll check on that and try to report at the next community meeting. But it could be a cool opportunity to talk to a bunch of end users and get maybe some of the vendors involved and stuff as well. So, well, Viert.
Yeah, it's a question about the OTAP proposal for the event tracking. So I saw this post from this other library for analytics. I was wondering, do you expect me to write a full comprehensive OTAP proposal, or do you would you all be fine if it will be like more like iterative things where I like the basics in first proposal and then like maybe a second proposal to enhance on it? Or do you want everything to be perfect on the
I mean, I would just start with the initial proposal and keep it relatively simple. We just want to make sure that we have kind of community buy-in to make sure that you don't invest too much time that we decide that this isn't the right it's not an item that we even want to address right now, because this one I think is maybe potentially iffy, because it kind of gets out of scope of feature flagging in general. I know that a lot of vendors do event tracking, and I see how they're certainly related, but I want to make sure that we have buy-in before we invest in a huge amount of effort into this. I don't know if what other people's thoughts are on that topic.
I think it's something that'll be interesting at some point too, yeah, but it's just it widens the scope quite a bit for what falls under tracking then.
Yeah, that would be there's certainly other likely higher priority tasks. So I'd say feel free to put out the proposal, but it's something that I think will we obviously need to invest in client side feature flagging and things like that, before we start looking at event tracking and that proposal too heavily, at least in my opinion. So
it'll probably be pretty vital for A/B testing, right? Like Azure, that's the only way you can do A/B testing. So I can imagine that, maybe it's down the line, but not something that we immediately take care of.
And lots of the feature flags can be driven by the event you have captured beforehand. So that's why most of our feature flags are working on.
Yep. Yeah, no, I mean, I see the value for sure. Part of it, for A/B testing, could potentially be handled by things like a hook that would send, the information that we need, or, maybe the OpenTelemetry integration could help with some of like the A/B testing pieces, but maybe not entirely, because we're talking about events that happened maybe earlier in a user session or something like that. So I think it's worth having the proposal out there. And if it, if there's, strong interest in this, I think we can certainly, adjust priority here. But I think in terms of just getting like basic feature flagging and providers and all these things in place, we still have a lot of work to do in that regard.
Yeah,
okay. Have we had any kind of like conversations about the idea of having like the core spec and then like extensions to the spec? Because like anything we add to the spec becomes anything we add to that spec kind of like becomes like a real kind of like an extra thing that like every provider potentially has to implement. And it feels like there's a potential where some like for this like events, for example, that like I think a lot of the commercial providers are definitely gonna like be interested in this, because they all have, I think most of them have like something like this for A/B testing, but most of the open source ones don't, because they're just more focused on just like kind of classic kind of feature flagging. Like I wonder if there's a way of like having like, and I was just thinking about it also in the context of this, like the flag change events thing that that Todd wrote up. Like, is there a way to kind of like have like the core spec and then kind of like extensions for specific kind of like extra bits that you could opt into, but you don't have to do?
I think that's likely how all of these more advanced features would work. So for example, like for the eventing one, not all providers will be able to do that. It's just kind of, I mean, or they can, but it will take a lot of effort. They'd have to like manually track it in the provider. And so the idea was we'd probably just want to have the provider just document that this is like an unsupported behavior, especially for the event one. It would just never fire, that tracking event, or in that case, excuse me, the change event method. So there would be nothing like negative about it. It just wouldn't, maybe behave fully, I suppose. So it's not ideal, but I don't know if it's a deal breaker. What do you think, Dan?
I was wondering actually for this, are we going to have documentation at some point about like portability between providers? Because that kind of brings up then like one of the goals to me was thinking, like you can switch between providers, but as we continue talking, there's always like these edge cases to it that like there's portability, but not. So I wonder if we can solve it with documentation, maybe.
I think that's our only option to some extent. It's like, it shouldn't break. I think that needs to be a goal, but for something like, change, like flag change events, it's like, if you're using a tool that supports it, you get it. And if you don't, and you need it, you may need to change to a tool that supports it to some extent. So
I guess if we wanted to do that, it feels like there needs to be some kind of like word or like language for like these kind of like chunks of the spec that like either you do, like vendors do or don't support. Vendor A can say, we support core OpenFeature plus the, events extension, or like the events bundle, or whatever the word is. And then someone who comes along can be like, oh, I'm I'm using this open source thing and I rely on, we use the blah blah bundle heavily. So I'm going to look through this table and see like, oh yeah, look, like LaunchDarkly does support it, but blah 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 doesn't.
Yeah, for some of these big ones, then I think the way we could maybe handle it is the spec is already numbered like 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. We'd have to make sure that for some of these big ones that will certainly not have coverage across every implementation, keep those as a separate number. And we could either have something that says like, this provider supports these ones, or this provider doesn't support, whatever section 5 or something, or whatever we want to call that. Could be one way to call that out.
Yeah, if some could be grouped into core or primary functionality, I guess, because I think I like what you said, Pete. I think it makes a lot of sense when a provider goes to add their provider detail to the docs. I guess it's on them to fill out that matrix of what they support, and then maybe some of the search functionality actually might be able to say like, you could search which SDK support core, which supports whatever extensions we want to have, like events, and you could see very easily.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, it's pretty easy to add like metadata into our spec. So maybe that, like, I think what we have now, we could probably say is core. I think everything else that we've talked about beyond this so far has been, yeah, things that would not necessarily translate across all vendors, and different tools that are available. So that would be the maybe that is something we could do right now. Kind of just go through and say like these are the core functionality, and unless something gets proposed that's obviously part of core, everything else would go under some kind of extensions or something like that that could be kind of named and called out explicitly.
I'm trying to think of a good
Yeah,
word for it. I think having a name for it would be helpful. Extensions isn't quite right.
I think OpenFeature has this compatibility matrix where you can see which providers support which stuff.
Yeah, we just need some
Like-
really buzzwordy
Yeah.
markety name for it.
Let's do something like unambiguous.
Power modules or something. I'm just kidding.
And we could probably add this in like an OFEP, right? So as an enhancement anyway on GitHub, so we can think on kind of the naming for a little bit.
Like extension module or something. I hate using module because module is just like the generic word that engineers use for
Yeah, or artifact or something. Yeah, it's
like
yeah,
engineering for dudes.
Plugins.
So okay, yeah, I think that's a good idea. I can take that as an action item, then just try to put a basic proposal out there for what we basically would call spec enhancements that are outside of core, and probably try to formalize like what we have as core already, because I think and I guess use this as an opportunity to review what we have so far, but I think everything that we have in there should be pretty universally applicable to tools. But if there are some areas that maybe shouldn't be part of core, I guess it would be a good opportunity to break those things out to some, whatever we want to call them, power module. So working title. Okay. Cool. It looks like Pete, you have last item.
Yeah, I snuck this in there while we were talking. I was just thinking about it, kind of like follows on a little bit from what we were just saying. So I guess I'm wondering, like, at what point do we want to start kind of like actively kind of talking to vendors, to open source projects, and saying like, hey, this thing is ready enough that we'd like to start persuading you to kind of like get this provider built and documented and ready to go. I feel like we've discussed this in the past, but I lost track a little bit of like.
Yeah. So kind of unofficially it started already. I think we should try to get this going. I mean, this is the best way to start getting feedback too. It's like when you go to implement a provider, you see what's missing. We can get real users to test it out. The only thing is like the spec is still changing. We'll try to not break it, but anyone that implements a provider is going to have to be a little bit flexible at this stage. Again, we'll try to avoid major issues and breaking changes, but I mean, the more providers we have at this stage, I think the better it is for the spec and just the success of the project. I do know that Split has started working on a basic, at least Java provider, and then same with CloudBees, and then the Go feature flag and Thomas. I'm sure you've seen him around in Slack, especially. He worked on one for Node.js. So that's available right now. And that's just located in our contribs repo. So there's a Node.js contribs repo. And so he put it in there. So that is worth mentioning though. There is in some SDKs, we have contrib repos defined. So we had one for Node created so far, and then James created one for Go recently. But it would be totally up to the vendor or the tool to decide where they'd prefer to have providers. That just kind of goes back to the discoverability aspect. Like if it's under the OpenFeature org, right now it'd be easier to find, but in the future, if we had a list, it arguably better if it's in like the vendor's org, because then it kind of shows more confidence that this is supported by the vendor itself.
And didn't we talk about this in one of the past meetings of trying to come up with the guidelines for that overall?
So
Where it's gonna land?
yeah, I started on that in the documentation right now under the provider docs. It's more around the naming conventions about like repos and stuff. I think I had language in there, at least I did in my notes, about preferring to keep it in orgs as opposed to inside the like the open feature maintained one. So that would be like, I think my preference, but it all comes back to the discoverability. So we'll have to have that, like, you know, people have the ability to find what providers are available. But yeah, I think I hope that there's language in there. I'll review that too. If I didn't put it in there, I may extend that just to say like kind of provide recommendations. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, it kind of comes down to whatever, you know, you guys want to do, to be honest, whatever makes the most sense. So yeah. Any other topics?
Would it make sense going back to that soliciting vendors thing? I wonder if it makes sense to kind of like have like a document or something that's just keeping track of like who we've talked to, because I think that various people are talking to various people who we've talked to and who like and what the status is. Because I guess what like the thing that I worry about the most, to be honest, is that like someone out there is kind of like checked, like was paying attention to OpenFeature like in what, like maybe one of the very early meetings, and then it's kind of like fallen off their radar, and then we're going to kind of at some point do some big announcements, and people are going to feel like that they lost out from being, you know, getting started on the provider because they just didn't realize that how like far along we were.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who we're talking to and who we're not.
Yeah. How would we want to track that? I mean, I could do it in maybe an issue, kind of like what we did in the early days of contacting different vendors. Or we could do it on just like a doc page, you know, like a Google Docs or something, and just share it with the group. I think especially as we start adding documentation, and if we have maybe one or two people, you know, that's been attending a lot of these meetings and kind of understand the situation, go through it once and make sure that the docs make sense, the process is pretty straightforward, then I'd feel a bit better about reaching out to the ones that have been maybe less active about, you know, getting involved. So, I don't know what we think about that.
Yeah, I mean, like an issue is a good place to, I mean, it seems like a good place to start at least.
Okay, so I can create a community issue for just kind of tracking yeah, provider or at least the communication, I suppose. I mean, it's certainly up to the vendor or tool to decide if they want to invest the time, but
yeah,
at least letting them know the current state, you know, status of everything.
And maybe it could just be like and I don't know if you can do this in the issue markdown. You probably can, of just having like a table of like like essentially like a reproduction of the table that would be on the website, right? Of like the vendor and then the which provider they're working on, and then we can kind of keep track of who's working on what.
Yeah, I'm not sure how flexible that, I mean, we can have like the issue that can be maybe edited, or I can edit it based on comments and stuff, but it's not the most ideal way of tracking that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to get the issue out there at least, and we can kind of work through it. Maybe that's another topic for another community meeting for how we can make the process a bit easier to track. But I think it makes sense, you know, from my perspective, it's like we have to have these providers in place, or, you know, nothing else is really that valuable, honestly. It's,
yeah,
you know, you have to register that in OpenFeature for anything to work. So, you know, providers are a huge piece of this. And I think we're already seeing, like, you know, as people start implementing providers, different use cases and edge cases and, you know, issues with either the spec or individual SDKs that need to be addressed. So, you know, now's a good time.
It's also like there's this kind of snowball effect, right? Of like, once you get enough people doing something, then I think it goes from like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this thing, to like, oh, I should do this thing because all the other people are doing this thing. So I guess that's part of what I'm thinking as well, just from like a marketing kind of aspect. It makes it look, you know, tracking who's working on it makes it more like visibly tracking who's working on stuff. Kind of adds a bit of FOMO, which might help. Kind of.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I'll start with the issue, and then I think we can kind of go from there. But yeah, I don't think it's the best way to track it, but we could start simple and see what else we can do. Cool. Any other topics? All right. Cool. I guess we can wrap up here then. Appreciate everyone's time.
I think we have to find scribe for the next time.
A scribe, yeah. You don't want to do it again? Any volunteers for the next one? Any volunteers?
I have a feeling I'm going to be in the US for the next one, but I will put my name forward for the one after that if there is a schedule.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, for now, I'll put my name in for the next one, and then we can maybe hopefully rely on Dave for the one after that. I appreciate it. Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in a few weeks.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.